Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A massive race in the context of this year's championship. Red Bull and Max Verstappen absolutely nowhere on pace today, but McLaren and Lando Norris not taking the advantage that they should have done. Massive questions on the decision making from McLaren and certainly Oscar Piastri over the first few laps of this race. The decision from Lando to push as he did on the tyres, not to make the one-stop even possible that Charles Leclerc eventually won the Grand Prix with. Massive questions as to whether this McLaren team and these drivers are actually capable of overturning the gap to Max Verstappen right now, despite the fact that it is still possible on paper. Leclerc wins in Monza for Ferrari. What a day. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. We will come back to this quote in the upcoming minutes, because let's not forget what happened back in Hungary when the team made the decision that it was better for the long-term prospect of McLaren to allow Piastri back through to get the victory against Norris. Sure, that might have helped the team environment. Potentially, you can debate that one for sure based on today, but also Lando Norris, as a result of that, lost valuable points in the championship. And they told Norris at the time, when they were kind of gaslighting him into giving the position back, hey, you're going to need Oscar. You're going to need the team if you want to win this championship. And well, when he needed Oscar today, guess what happened? We'll get into that in a second. Just quickly today, the Formula 3 race was mesmerizingly good. If you guys don't know what happens there, I will just say, go and watch it, at least some highlights or something. It's one of the best motor races you're probably ever going to watch. Formula 2, however, was won today by Gabriel Bortoleto, who started dead last P22, and thanks to a safety car and some great driving, ended up winning the race. So this was actually a pretty big statement from Bortoleto, because he is in the conversation to potentially get the Audi drive next season, and even that's been a talk today from Mattia Binotto, who's kind of running the show over there now, that Mick Schumacher is in the conversation, but also Gabriel Bortoleto is meant to be talked about as well. But let's get straight into the race here, right? Because this was McLaren's to lose today, a 1-2 on the grid, a day where absolutely, in terms of the championship fight, Norris really needed to secure a P1 result, and obviously they were looking for a P2. They got the P2, they didn't get the victory today. Andreas Stella went into the race saying that actually their problems at the Dutch Grand Prix for both Piastri and Norris off the line were caused by, some software stuff, basically car related. They said they'd fix that, and therefore for today it was going to be fantastic. They were going to lead into turn 1 as a 1-2. Which is exactly what they did. And this was the big question for today. We had no idea who was going to be the fastest car. No idea who was going to be able to make the one-stop work here. Red Bull were meant to be pretty good on their long-run data earlier in the weekend. Of course, that was not true when we got to the race today. But Lando Norris and McLaren, perfect position to capitalise at the start of the race. Perfect start from Lando Norris, comes over to cut off Piastri into turn 1. Piastri cuts off Russell, kind of forces him over. Russell goes a bit too deep, damages the front wing. His race at that point was effectively over. But perfect for McLaren. They get into turn 1 correctly. That's what they were looking to do. But of course, then you're going to have a run down into the Roger chicane. And this, I think, is a matter of conversation that McLaren should have had before the race. And I imagine they probably might have had. Nico Rosberg was pressing Zak Brown yesterday after qualifying to say, hey, what are you going to do tomorrow when it comes down to your two drivers? Because you're in a championship fight for the constructors, which you're almost certainly going to win. The drivers' fight is the one that is up for debate, and Norris needs to get maximum points if you want to win that as well for the first time in a very, very long time. Piastri puts on one of the best moves I've ever seen. Round the outside of the Roger chicane, I mean, just a sensational pass. If it was on somebody not your teammate, still a sensational pass. But given the context of the season and the circumstances, this was surprising for me from both angles. Not just Piastri effectively saying, screw you, Lando. Like, I'm taking this race win and I don't care about your championship, but also from the McLaren point of view, when they might not have said something about this, like, surely there's a conversation that says, okay, if Lando's leading from Oscar and there's no real threat from behind running into the Roger chicane, probably just hold stations, right? You'd think that would be the conversation. But no, and, on some level, fair play, they've let them race here. And Piastri's made a mega move. But also, the way that Piastri makes the pass puts Lando on the real back foot. I mean, it puts him so offline that Leclerc then makes the run on him and eventually gets P2. So as much as it was a great move from Oscar, to me, it's a move that really shouldn't have happened. Like, I think McLaren should have had a conversation to say, this isn't something they should have done. I think they should have just kept position, personally. Like, that's, maybe you don't like team orders, and that's fair enough. But I think in these circumstances, that would have been justified. And because Oscar makes the phenomenal move that he makes, and again, Lando is not leading out of lap 1, And, I don't really know what else Lando could have done, really. I mean, he could have broke deeper. Like, if I was Lando, I might have just broken deeper and said, all right, Oscar, you tried to make the move on the outside, you're going off the track. That was the only other thing that Lando could have done, is just to squeeze Piastri out of road. And he didn't really want to do that because it's his teammate. But Oscar was, I don't care, I'm cutting you off. And I'm obviously allowing Charles Leclerc to come through as well. And that's the fascinating thing about this development really here today, is that what it means internally at McLaren, because back at the start of let's say Hungary, when Piastri was helping out Norris, and basically that was what the argument was, that, if you're going to win this championship, Piastri's going to help you out. When push came to shove and he needed some help, of course, that's not what happened at all, and even it put him down to third position, right? So that was, I think, the first error of the day from McLaren in what should have been an easy one too, but there are more to come, don't worry about that. Russell's car was damaged, he got into a bit of a fight later on with Perez. This, of course, was the running at this point when it seems like, the McLarens were probably going to drive off at this point, certainly after they made the early pit stops. They went for the undercut on Leclerc, they got the undercut done, and of course then they were running 1-2 in the Grand Prix. Perez and Russell had a bit of a scrap. They started the Red Bulls on the hards, hoping to go long for a one-stop, which, it was possible, of course, but it just wasn't especially fast. They pulled the undercut, Norris even hit, he hit this barrier, and he locked up, Norris seems like a championship driver on a Saturday, and he seems like a championship driver when he's leading a race on not lap 1 on a Sunday. But outside of that, he just has a lot of flaws. That's he's got the pace. Everyone knows this, but there's just a few flaws in Norris, from a driving perspective, that hold him back, I think. This championship should absolutely be on, but I still can't believe that it actually will be with the way things are currently looking. So Norris gets out ahead of Leclerc. They make the undercut work, and it's looking great, of course, for McLaren at this point. All they've got to do is nurse the tyres as much as possible, but it felt like at this point they were committed, McLaren, to the two-stop. And Hamilton said this after the race. He was very surprised that McLaren effectively just pushed to the absolute limits here. They were riding incredibly fast lap times, and Hamilton after the race was like, there's no way they could have one-stopped that. He reckons, Hamilton, and maybe the team doesn't reckon, but it seems like, based on what we saw elsewhere, it was possible. I think the one-stop was possible if they didn't push as hard as they did. But McLaren had clearly decided they were going to go for the two-stop today. They pushed as a result of it with the intention of catching up Leclerc at the end of the race. And I think strategically, that was probably an error. This is Max Verstappen, by the way, still clearly struggling with the balance of that car. I mean, I thought, especially after the start, he gets the place because Russell drops back. There was a chance for Verstappen to make some progress, but it just didn't materialise at all. And at about the same time, Kevin Magnussen was terrorising the field and secures himself, for the first time, I'm pretty sure, since the penalty point system has come into effect, a ban for the next race. It will be probably in Baku, right? Accumulating 12 points on his licence. I mean, this guy, 10 place penalty or 10-second penalty for this, 10-second penalty for that, just going bowling into turn 1. It was another absolute shambles, I'm not going to lie, for Magnussen, so no real surprise he's not going to be on the grid for next season. But this was the fascinating moment to me, because they told Lando at this point, you're allowed to race Oscar, papaya rules, and first of all, you're allowed to race Oscar. Oscar should be the one who the question is as to whether he can race Lando. The question, that's my perspective. If you're McLaren, you're trying to fight for this championship, sure, great move, Oscar. But, and clearly, given the fact that Oscar went for that move, they didn't have the conversation before the race that said, well, if the time makes sense, we're going to yield that position to Lando to give him the extra points he needs in the championship, which surely would be the conversation. I just don't really see the benefit, especially the way the race ended, we'll get to in a second. So they told him, papaya rules, whatever that means, a long way away from multi-21. If this was Red Bull, Red Bull, as much as they've fallen off, right, and whatever you want to say, they are still championships, they're championship winners at heart on some level, right? They have that ruthlessness, they have that level. You think there's any way that Red Bull or even Mercedes, when they were winning things, would allow things to be run like this? I mean, this is the issue for McLaren. They have absolutely a championship winning car. I don't know if they have championship winning drivers, and they don't have a championship winning mentality. It seems that way to me anyway, because I was very surprised by lots of these decisions. Norris then obviously goes for the second pit stop, and they're trying to make the progress through the field. Leclerc, look, I talk about Leclerc most weeks at this point, how impressed I am by him, and just how incredible this guy is. And we saw it again today. Absolute masterclass from Leclerc to keep the tyres alive in front of the Tifosi. Just such a phenomenal weekend. And we've got to talk about Ferrari as well, because they brought an upgrade here. We talked about the upgrade over the last few days. They absolutely needed this upgrade to work. If it didn't, not only this year, but likely next year was going to be over as well. And yes, it's Monza, very different circuit to what we're going to see elsewhere. But in race trim again, the Ferrari is coming alive and is able to hold on to the tyres. Max, of course, had to defend against Lando at one point. Of course, interesting for his own championship battle, but eventually there was not too much he could do about it. And both Piastri and Norris eventually do get past Sainz, but they cannot get past Charles Leclerc. And over the last couple of laps, this was another question, because obviously Piastri was chasing the win, but it was quite clear that he wasn't going to catch Leclerc given the pace at that point in the Grand Prix. Leclerc did a great job holding onto the tyres. So then the question is, well, do you swap positions? You're second and third in the race. You've bottled it because obviously the start wasn't ideal, dropping Lando to third. And also the two-stop strategy was probably not the way to go either. So, maybe Lando will say, oh, we couldn't have done it anyway. But I think they probably could. I don't know. Most of the drivers think that they probably could have done. But that's maybe a matter for debate as to whether they could have made it or not. Lando was saying the front tyre deg wasn't great compared to what the Ferrari seemed to have. But even at this point, you're second and third. Norris just gets the fastest lap. You're getting the same amount of constructors' points anyway. You can argue that you should just be swapping the drivers there. I'm surprised they didn't. Lando said that I'm not going to ask to. That's not how I want to be. I want to win on track. But it's just, if you're McLaren and you're actually serious about fighting for these championships, you've just thrown away more points today, needlessly, I would say, in that championship battle. And Max has got to be thanking his lucky stars. First of all, that Charles Leclerc is so good last weekend and this weekend. And also that McLaren just keep throwing it away. Leclerc was on the radio saying his engineer was telling him to put the brake balance up, and he was like, I've not done it for the last 10 laps you've told me to. I'm not going to do it now. And he wins, Il Presidente, whatever they call it, right? Winning in front of the Tifosi. It's always an incredible moment. And I don't know what it is about Ferrari, right? Like every year, even if they don't produce a car that's going to win a championship, they're always a threat at Monza. And this time they go on and win it. I mean, you've got to say fair play to Ferrari as well, like their strategy, their pit crew, the way they pulled this off. 1, 2, 3, Leclerc wins some Sainz off from Piastri and Norris. Sainz in fourth, Hamilton is eventually fifth, and Verstappen and Perez, made just no real progress at all. Fair play to Magnussen actually getting a point in the end despite his penalty. Albon with a couple in P9. And even Colapinto was P12, so excellent debut for him in the end. And Max was not happy, right? He was actually kind of fuming at Red Bull. You can tell by his face here. Maybe one of these is on the thumbnail. And saying that he was asking for battery and fighting Lando. And when he was like, can I go back to this other mode? They were like, yeah, you can. He was like, why didn't you tell me that I could? So Max is not a happy man. And he said even after the race, at this moment, both championships do not look realistic, which, sure, constructors is over basically. But for the drivers, he's still the favourite. He's still absolutely the favourite. Like, the gap can be overturned. Maybe it will be overturned. But it's going to take McLaren being better than they were today. And obviously Max is also saying that the car was terrible. The pit stop was bad. Like, it was a dramatic race. The car didn't respond. The strategies weren't good. And I had no power. So, it's an absolute shambles, really. And I just wanted to share these numbers for you guys again because, I don't know. I've talked about this over the last couple of weeks, but are you seriously telling me that this data looks right to you? In terms of, McLaren just brought some good upgrades. And Red Bull, they've clearly lost their way on some level, but why can't they just go back to the car they had in China? Because their race pace in China was 8 tenths ahead of McLaren, a second and a half ahead of Ferrari and Mercedes. You're telling me that they're now 6 tenths down? Yeah, I'm not going to talk about that anymore because, I've talked about that enough already over the last couple of weeks. Lando is making the comment about the fact that he feels like Ferrari had a better car. They certainly did a better job. Maybe in terms of front tyre deck, they might have done, but, there's no excuses really today for McLaren not to have won two. And, look at their faces. This is meant to be a celebration. Lando P3, Oscar P2, and here they are looking glum as ever. And Zach Brown can say what he wants about, great result for the team, double podium, good points in the constructors. Respectfully, the fans and the drivers don't really care about the constructors. It's about the drivers' championship, and especially because the drivers' championship fight is absolutely on, you gotta think, right? And this is the problem, I think, with McLaren and also Zach Brown talking about the fact that, we've got two number ones. Whenever you say that, you're asking for trouble, I think. And even Will Buxton was fed up of him saying this because it just creates issues. that, I guess, was their clarification. Last night after qualifying, they had a conversation with the team, and the conversation probably should have been, if the opportunity arises, we are going to make sure Lando's in front, because it just makes sense for the championship. And you know, the conversation clearly wasn't had, and I think that's a problem. Hamilton, after the race, was like, yeah, McLaren were just pushing too hard. They could have one-stopped, obviously gives credit to his future teammate in Charles Leclerc, and you know, Norris after the race did say, I'm not sure what else I could have done at turn 4. Like, if I break a meter later, we probably would have crashed. I mean, I imagine that Piastri would have yielded, but I was just surprised by the aggression, really. I mean, it was a great move, but, you know, a great move that you might put on a championship rival at an important race, not maybe a great move that you put on your teammate. So, and it's going to be fascinating what this means for Piastri, because I know there's been some discussion as well about the fact that, you know, is Piastri getting into that mode where beating Norris is now of primary concern rather than necessarily the best for the team, which of course would also be, you'd think, Norris's championship fight. I'm sure Piastri, if he was forced to, would accept his position as number 2 for the rest of the season. And he should be in that position, as good as he may be, given the way that the championship has gone. But we're going to leave it there for today. Massively intrigued to your thoughts and all this stuff in the comment section below. And yet again, Red Bull are ending the day thanking Charles Leclerc for not creating, you know, the gap that they could have had in the championship. But in the end, Lando closes the gap on Verstappen by 8 points, which is what he needs to close the gap by every weekend. But this weekend, he should have capitalised way more than that. McLaren should have capitalised way more than that. And if he closes the gap by 8 points a weekend for the next 8 races, he wins the championship only by a very slender margin. So it's still absolutely on. And if Red Bull continue to perform as they did this weekend, the fight is still there. But on what I saw today, I'm just not sure McLaren have the minerals. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Take care. And I'll see you next time.